is on their 8th house in Houston, I have literally made them or caused them to make the decision to go back out to the vehicle and get a pad and paper and a pen because they're learning stuff they never knew about how to maintain a house in our part of the world. A lot of people don't know half as much about houses as they think they do. The other thing that I really need you to prepare the buyer for is the fact that there isn't any such thing as a perfect house, especially new ones. Now, your License Act requires you to recommend an inspection on all homes, right? The key is that includes new construction. Now, you don't have to do a phase inspection if they're building from the ground up. You don't have to do pre-pour, open wall, and final. We offer that. I think at least the frame makes huge sense. If the builder's pre-pour is usually adequate, but beyond that, their inspections are woefully inadequate. But I have a better chance of finding a perfect home between 2 and 8 years of age, still with being owned by its original owner, than new construction. Much better chance. What I politely refer to as broken in without being broken down. The builders, and these are there's really good builders here in the Woodlands and in places like Wood Forest. There's some great builders here, both production and custom. But when you have 200 people working on a house, speaking 3 or 4 different dialects of Spanish and some other languages thrown in there, some of the guys working in the house don't speak much English. There's going to be coordination problems. And the result is things are going to happen. So, I'm here to tell you that with very few exceptions, I routinely find cleaner 2 and 3 and 4 year old houses than new construction. Happens all the time. But any house we're going to find things wrong with. Any house they're going to have to be prepared to make decisions about what is important and not important as far as repairs. What is our role? Our role is to not waste your time, to use your time effectively. So I should be there plus or minus 10 minutes, traffic being what it is. I laugh because I was an artillery officer in the Army. Our measure of success was plus or minus 3 seconds. And as a business person when I first started, I prided myself at being early or I was late. I routinely show up to home inspections now 15 to 20 minutes late because of traffic. The more Houston grows, the dumber it gets, because I will go downtown first thing in the morning and then have to come up here and do a home inspection. And if those of you who've driven to the Galleria and back know how ugly that can be. So we'll communicate with you if we're going to be late. But once I'm here, this seems like an odd point to have to discuss, but I'm here to tell you there are guys who spend far too much time talking about things that have nothing to do with the home inspection and waste your time and your client's time telling war stories. Occasional war stories to illustrate a point makes sense, but beating a dead horse is not useful. I prefer people that speak common term, plain language. We've all dealt with electricians, plumbers, doctors who cannot bring the professional jargon down to a level where you can understand it. Home inspectors are no different. I frequently catch myself in my discussion of ground fault circuit interrupt outlets as opposed to arc fault circuit interrupt breakers. And I have to slow down and explain the difference between GFCIs and AFCIs. We'll get to it in a little bit. But everybody has a professional language, and you have to be very careful about it. One thing I learned in the Army, it's one of the most effective ways for a bullshit artist to, excuse me the language, but in the Army they used to say, if you really don't know what you're talking about, baffle them with bullshit. And a home inspector that doesn't know the answer when they're asked a legitimate question can drop into that mode, as can a plumber, an electrician, or a doctor, or a lawyer. So a good home inspector will communicate clearly, and somewhere in the next couple of slides I also have a bullet. My pet peeve from the military is, if you don't know the answer, say you don't know the answer. Most people find that refreshing because so many people are BS artists today. For somebody who's new to the industry, I don't know how new you guys are, I find that refreshing. You know, I'm lucky my dad told me that before I went in as a second lieutenant. If you don't know, say you don't know. You're not supposed to know, you're a second lieutenant. Well, that's what you guys are in real estate. Balanced and realistic perspective. Read the paragraph there in Trek. This is really huge for me. Buyers pay my bill, but my loyalty is not to the buyer. My loyalty is not to the seller. What I tell everybody is the same thing. My loyalty is to the truth, or it is what it is. Yes, the buyer's paying me to come out to the house, but I'm required to be fair to all parties. So I am not going to beat the snot out of a house so that the buyer gets good negotiating position against a seller, because that's unfair to the seller. It is what it is. I'm not going to write up an exhaust vent as needing in desperate repair to terminate it to the exterior on a 1985 house. Am I going to mention it to the buyer that the code has changed, and as is convenient, at his own expense, he might want to consider doing this? Oh, absolutely, because that's considered a safety item. But it's not something that needs to be repaired. So the key is to have enough common sense and experience as a home inspector to recognize what hills are worth dying on. What is important enough to be in writing as a negotiable failure or issue? What is supposed to be in writing for just the awareness of the buyer? And what is not even worth mentioning? There are issues that, yes, are not even worth mentioning in a house. If you buy a 1920 pier and beam house in the Heights, and you can, as you walk around the house, feel a slight unlevelness. If it rises to a certain level, that should be mentioned. If it's got sheetrock cracking in the walls, that should be mentioned. But if it really has been repaired and it's mostly level, and there's no damage and there's no doors or windows, that's a pier and beam house. You got a pier and beam house. You don't want that? Buy a slab house. It is what it is. And a good home inspector has to have the experience to exercise appropriate judgment, because that can bite you in the butt if you don't know what you're doing when you're doing that as a home inspector. Easy to read, comprehensive report. When we get to talking about the report, this is huge for me. There is a guy in town whose base report is 52 pages. 18 of it is what I consider CYA language, telling you about how slabs move in clay portions of the world. Given that all of Houston is in clay portion of the world, why do you need 18 pages of boilerplate that really reflect no information on the house? My baseline report is 11 pages long. If your house is really in bad shape and I'm beating it to death, it's going to be 27 pages with pictures. I've seen 80, 100-page reports. How do you plow through that as a realtor to find out for your negotiations what hills are worth dying on? You got to get a highlighter and dedicate 4 hours of your afternoon to reading every word of a report with a highlighter, playing Where's the Beef. That's not terribly helpful. So I like reports where there's some designator that this is a comment you need to pay attention to. You'll see people that put their problems in a box. We put a red X or a blue caret at the front of ours. Some of us put summary pages at the back, some of us don't. I like summary pages because you guys have told me you like summary pages. So it's a service industry, so we do it. But I don't blame the guys who don't do summary pages as long as they do something to designate, okay, here's what I inspected about walls, floors, and ceilings. Here's what you need to glean from what I found. And they'll put a box around it. That's okay, so that you don't have to read it with a highlighter. The whole point at the end of the inspection is that we're going to give you a report, and then we're gone. And you need a document you can use. This whole experience boils down to a report. If that report is not usable, was the entire experience worthwhile? No. And this is where a lot of home inspectors forget. It really doesn't matter what a great guy you were on site, how friendly you were, how snappily dressed you were, how perfect your language was, and how much you know about everything. If you can't communicate it to the state report in an effective manner where it's usable by the general public, what good was your visit to that house? Good home inspectors should maintain a positive attitude throughout. It's kind of a pet peeve of mine, is why I threw that in there. There's a lot of home inspectors who try to find a reason to theoretically kill every deal so that when you don't kill the deal when you buy the house, they have something to point to if you ever come back to them and say, I told you not to buy the house. It's a CYA technique. Not a big fan. And then be there after the fact, because no matter how good I communicate, your experience in life is different than my experience in life. So you're going to have a question based on what happened to you at your house in Illinois before you moved down here, and I may not have addressed it the right way. Now, I'm the guy during the home inspection that when you ask, when I detect a pattern in your questions, I'm going to stop and say, so tell me the story, what happened in Illinois? So that I know how to address those kinds of questions. And I hear, scary stories about failed, basements, and have to explain to them why, that's not a big concern here. I've actually done 3 basements in Houston, believe it or not.
Why aren't basements common here?
Why are basements not common?
Not common. Why don't we have them in Houston?
Excellent question. All homes are footed 6 inches below the frost line. So in Chicago, your frost line is 42 inches. So if I'm going to go 48 inches, why don't I go 3 more feet and have standable, usable space? And that's why you have basements in most places. Now, you don't really have to have a basement until you get halfway through Canada. The rest of them can build variations of crawl spaces, which is why you see those some places. But really, basements are convenience trying to get below the frost line. What's our frost line here? Trick question. We don't have one. It's 0. So a slab is all that's necessary. Plus, given the way clay soils operate, slabs work. Post-tension slabs work fabulously, which is why 99% of what you have is a post-tension foundation here.
So there's no reason somebody couldn't have a basement here?
That is correct. Every building downtown. That's the common joke you hear in construction is, what do you call a basement in Houston? Indoor swimming pool. No. Yeah, during Allison we had a few indoor swimming pools, but every building downtown, all the buildings at the waterway, have 3- and 4-story basements. We can build them, but I tell affluent people who are talking about doing those kinds of things, I always say you need to deal with a commercial construction company building your house, or at least the foundation up to the ground level, because that is not a skill set residential builders have here. In Kansas City, you can find lots of residential guys who build a good basement, but down here, forget it. So as a result, all the truly huge houses in Houston that have the 1- 2-story parking basement, for the guys' Maserati collection, those are all built in River Oaks by commercial construction firms. Our license act is not terribly long, and it is obviously part of the TREC standards. mainly it talks in terms of procedures, education, and standards of practice. Every topic here, and we're about to go through a whole group of them, it's what an inspector is responsible to do in this area, and then more importantly, what we're not responsible. Now, why is that more important? Because, once again, I'm not an engineer. I'm not a plumber. I'm not an electrician. I'm a generalist. So there are things that we are responsible for doing and things we're not responsible for doing. So it is important to understand that, which is why I encourage any real estate agent to read that. Part of the reason I want you to read that is because I also want you to know enough to know what we can and can't do. I literally got a nasty email from a real estate agent last week because she was the listing agent and didn't appreciate, not in this office thankfully, did not appreciate the fact that the inspector who did the inspection verbally discussed the expected life expectancy of the roof on the house. This is an absolutely common question. I'm getting a little ahead of myself. We'll cover this fairly early in the standards practice slides. Every one of your buyers wants to know how long the roof's going to last. Every damn one of them. Even the ones who are buying new construction ask me, how long can I expect this thing to last? But particularly after a house is 8 to 10 years old. Because I'm here to tell you, we all have 30-year roofs, and none of us are going to get over 20 out of it. Because it's going to be murdered in its youth or middle age by the weather. So we routinely make a statement verbally or in writing that you're going to have about 3 to 5 more years left in the life expectancy. You need to prepare. And we do the same things with water heaters. Because there is a life expectancy, we always say the same thing. It's performing the function for which it's intended. However, it's entering the final phases of its life, so you need to prepare for the possibility that this roof will die. The License Act does not say that I cannot talk about life expectancy. It says that I'm not responsible for determining life expectancy. There's a subtle difference. Doesn't mean I'm barred from having an opinion. It means I need to be careful and to be general, not specific. These are important understandings, and part of the reason why I got off track about the roof. Something can be functioning but still be defective, and that's a point occasionally lost on a seller who just doesn't want to hear it. But these are really the bottom lines for me on everything. Is an item performing the function for which it's intended? Yes. Okay, so I'm not going to badmouth it too much because it's performing the function for which it's intended. However, there are defects that give me pause to wonder. Now, some defects keep the thing from working. So with the dishwasher, I'm not very often going to say it's functioning but has issues. It usually is just going to be, well, actually, yeah, because when I mentioned that the spring doesn't work on the door, the dishwasher could still be working perfectly well. But roofs, you can well imagine that I can see, 5 or 6 wind-lifted tabs, evidence of wind damage on a roof, but no leaks, good gravel, good granular surface, otherwise a good roof. So it's still performing the function for which it's intended, but it's had some recent wind damage. That's a roof that's 12 to 14 years or entering what we jokingly call the window of death. The next major event, the next hurricane, the next tropical storm, the next huge windstorm is going to kill it. And I've literally had that discussion with somebody, and then while I'm inside the house, hail came through and destroyed the roof while we were in the house. So,
for which the homeowner was extremely grateful.
The buyer was jazzed.
Yeah.
The seller actually wasn't that happy because she realized she was going to have to pay the deductible. So I think there's some negotiations went on there. And the same thing happened last week on that 1985 house. It was beautiful except for the roof. But they're going to negotiate, and I think the seller is going to not, I think the buyer was going to help actually compensate the seller for the deductible. You can do whatever you want to do. But understand that just because it's functioning doesn't mean there aren't defects. And just because it's got defects doesn't mean it's going to be completely dead and not functional. But these are the things that I'm really looking to answer every time I look at an item in the house, item or system. Key to understand the scope of my inspection. and the things that we're about to go over. These are the minimum levels, and this is another thing the agent from the other office that got all upset about talking about 3 to 5 years on a roof. These are the minimum levels of practice. So I can, if I'm qualified and have the experience, and after 10,000 home inspections, I think I'm qualified enough to say that a roof is entering in its final phase of life. I have more experience on roofs than half the roofers in town. These are the things that I'm required to do. Present and visible items at the time of the inspection. That's key once again. Things happen after the inspection, before close. I get that that's generally only about a month. But there's a mental switch, I'm here to tell you, that is thrown in the head of a lot of sellers. The good news is, in the more affluent neighborhoods, I find that switch thrown far less often. Where I pass the inspection, I don't have to care about the house anymore. And things happen and they don't tell you as the buyer's agent, or they don't even tell their own agent. And you know, the buyer moves into the house after the seller moves out and finds things that are broken that weren't broken at the time of the inspection. I can't know that's going to happen. I operate things only in their normal mode. So if they don't respond, if I turn the AC, the thermostat to cool and drop the temperature to 50, I think we can all agree the AC should come on. If it doesn't come on, now I'm going to check the breakers, I'm going to check the service disconnect in the attic and the one out by the compressor. But if all those are set and it doesn't come on, I am not going to spend a lot of time trying to figure out why it's not working. I'm just going to write up that it didn't respond, and then we're going to have an HVAC guy come out. We have to there are certain demand items that the state wants me to tell you, like what flavor wire comes from the service meter to the main breaker on top. Is it aluminum or copper? What flavor wire goes into the house from the distribution breakers? It had better be copper past 1976. Those are what are called demand items. The state requires me to tell you what kind of foundation you have. And then I have to do a standard form, and I have to put my name and number on everything, which is why the card in front of you has your name and number on it. These are the things that we don't do. No home inspector warrants a home inspection. We actually experimented. I've been doing this long enough that I have actually built a company, sold it to a large national, ran theirs for 5 years, quit and started my own company again. So I'm on my third company doing the same stinking thing in the same place. But I had to teach myself again that I didn't want to work for a large American company. You know, you forget, you relearn. But when I was with US Inspect, we experimented with a warranted home inspection. It was another $300. And we sold exactly 0 in this marketplace. Basically combining the process of a warranty with a home inspection. And apparently the marketplace sees those as 2 separate items. We can't guarantee any future performance, which goes with can't predict when anything's going to die. Intrusive, destructive, we talked about. Non-operational systems, turn on utilities. And I probably shouldn't say this since I'm on camera, but when I started, we all carried big wrenches and turned on gas meters. And HL&P back in the day pursued a couple of home inspectors in Houston for doing that. I mean, it's theft of services. And so we all kind of basically said, we're not doing that anymore. So I can't emphasize enough, if the utilities aren't on, we're not turning it on, and we're not going to turn on a system that was off in a house. I cannot assure the completeness of any inspection. What? Yeah. I can't tell you when I walk out the door that I found everything on a house. I can tell you I looked at everything. My contract, my service agreement with your client, which they acknowledge online before we even come out to the inspection, says that it is not a complete, exhaustive inspection, that there will be things that were not found. Now, they shouldn't be visual things. but there are issues that are going to crop up in the first year of any home ownership. The last time I saw a statistic, it was that if the average homeowner will spend $1,000 in the first year on unforeseen repairs. Now, we like to think that that's going to be $100 here, $150 there on penny-ante stuff. But in the end, no home inspector is going to be able to find everything. From the outlet cover plate that's missing behind that wall unit because I'm not going to move it. Now that one's easy to look behind, but you can imagine in china hutches and the headboard for your master king-size bed, and there's always an outlet behind there. And what if there's not a cover plate? That's a safety item. I'm supposed to list every missing cover plate in the house. I can't possibly see all the walls unless the house is completely unoccupied. So no home inspection is complete, and we always try to cover that verbally and give some examples with your clients, because a lot of them don't understand that until you start talking about moving furniture and stuff, and then it's one of those realistic expectation issues that we like to bring up as much as possible. Now, repair costs are one of those things where there's a lot of misunderstanding, because can we ballpark some things? And do we? Absolutely. Will you ever see anything in writing on my report? No way. In the state of Texas, a home inspector may not do repairs on a house for 365 days after closing, after he does a home inspection. In our marketplace, you will not find a home inspector who also does repairs. But in the middle of East Texas, where there might be 100 home inspections to be done in a 2-county area in the entire year, a lot of those guys that are home inspectors also have repair companies. Well, they can't repair the houses that they did, conflict of interest. As a result, I cannot quote the work of somebody else. So how do I know what it's going to cost to have the hole in the sheetrock or the roof repaired or whatever else? Can I give you some ballparks? Yes, I know the difference between a $7,000 roof and a $14,000 roof. But in the end, when you get my report and you go through and figure out what hills the buyer wants to die on, you then have to go through the process of figuring out what is the value of that. So having a network of go-to people to quickly be able to rely on them giving you some ballpark so that you know what to deal with is key to your operation. And unfortunately, I can't be a lot of help on that. I'd like to be able to, but frankly, in an unregulated marketplace like we live in, one of the great things about Texas is it is a business-friendly state. You do not have to use an electrician and pull a permit to do everything in a house. A handyman can do it, or an electrician can do certain things, but they have different pricing structures. And then you'll find handymen that are all over the board. So you've really got to have a couple of go-to people so that you can figure out what the costs are, because I can't help you with it. Run equipment out of manufacturer's tolerance. That comes up because of air conditioning. Did you know you're not supposed to run an air conditioner when it's below 60 degrees? A lot of people in the south, extreme south, along the Gulf Coast in Florida don't know that. But you're not supposed to run an air conditioner when it's below 60. It's bad for the compressor. The oil can gum up, particularly on older units. So, do I run a lot of air conditioners in December to test the ACs? No, I don't. And every year, at least one real estate agent who's born and raised in Houston has never heard that before. In fact, grew up with her parents, his or her parents, turning on the air conditioning in December so they could cool the house down, so they could have a fire and have a nice Christmas feel to that. What do you mean you can't run the air conditioner because it's 50? It happens every year. But manufacturer's tolerance, an air conditioner exists to cool a house in hot weather. 55 degrees is not hot weather. Okay, we're gonna do, let me see where I am, and we need to take a break here. I think we'll do this slide and then we get into the yep. We're going to do the next 2 slides and then we're going to talk about a break for a little while. Okay. Environmental conditions is huge. Mold. to talk about asbestos comes up every once in a while, urethral formaldehyde comes up once in a while, but really in our environment, if you guys haven't heard war stories yet, do talk to your peers who were here in the late 90s, and you will hear stories about people remediating houses because of mold. The short version is toxic molds cannot be detected with your nose or your eyes. They can only be detected by doing a proper indoor air quality analysis involving what's called the nanometer, a special piece of test equipment by somebody licensed by Texas Department of Health. It's not part of what we do. And every year somebody gets uppity with us because during the remodel, after they move into the house, some, excuse my language, jackass remodeling guy will say, that black funk on your wall is mold. Your home inspector should have told you you had mold. Well, first of all, this is South Texas. It's mildew most of the time. And he's using his eyes and his nose. You got to do an indoor air quality analysis. In the end, back in the day when they weren't licensed and we did do mold testing, we had one house ever, of all the mold tests we ever did, where somebody actually had it. Every other house where people thought they had mold, they didn't. They had mildew. We've all seen mildew in a bathroom. And why does it grow? Humidity in an enclosed space. If your air conditioning isn't tuned up and your humidity level gets a little too high, there's lots of other things that can cause things that look like and cause people to suspect mold that isn't mold.
Glenn, in my last home, on our air registers in the ceiling, we would get the little black stuff growing. We thought it was mold. We had the vents cleaned. We installed a dehumidifier. Was that mildew?
Probably. I have managed to get it to go away in every room of the house except my daughter's bedroom. Now she's at college, so she doesn't live there anymore, so it's not a huge deal for me. But the thing you forget is hot plus cold equals what? Condensation. And in our environment, that equals the potential for mildew. So if you look at the way any of these registers sit into the ceiling, when you take the cover off, there's a gap. Okay, so you got hot air coming out of the attic, meeting cold air coming down the duct. Hot plus cold equals condensation. So you get a little sweat around the register, which we've all seen, and that can create an opportunity for mildew. Doesn't mean you have a mold problem. There's, and I'll say once again, since I'm on camera, I'm not a mold guy, I'm not licensed to do that, but I have enough knowledge to know when to tell home buyers that I suspect something, but in general, we tell home buyers, I can't tell you that. I just don't know.
So we even pay to have that UV light installed?
Those are great.
So you think that wasn't a scam or anything?
No, UV lights are great. Dehumidifiers are redundant because that's what an evaporator does in an air conditioner.
Okay.
Your air conditioning is dehumidifying your house.
So the UV light will attack mold and mildew?
It kills all microbial growth floating past it. Now the thing is, you got to change the light bulb or clean it periodically, which is the thing that a lot of people don't do. Most of your new construction houses now, they're putting in larger 4-inch filters, which get more crap out of the air. And then you can opt for the light bulb. But most of the light bulbs have to be cleaned quarterly and changed annually. And nobody does that. So, no problem. A home inspector doesn't inspect for termites or any other wood destroying insect or hazardous waste. Now, we're licensed. I'm not personally. 2 of the 5 of us are not, but 3 of the 5 of us are licensed for termite inspectors, so we are both home inspectors and termite inspectors. For me and Jerry, if we come out to do the home inspection, Scott, our full-time only pest control guy, comes out and does the WDI. So we'll get it done within the company, but the average home inspector is not a bug guy. Now, most of us have lived here long enough that I know that there's termites. I can't tell you how many times I've said, Scott, the termites are over there, go look at them. We don't do code compliance, ordinance compliance. We don't do efficiency, durability, or quality. Now, do I get asked every time we're looking at a compressor, what SEER is this thing? And I always want to ask the buyer, why? What does it mean? Because I think most of them don't even know why they're asking it. They just know that they need a higher SEER unit. Well, yes, I know how to read the encoding so that I can tell them if it's a 14 or 13 or 16 SEER unit. But then we have to have a little discussion about just because you have a 16 SEER compressor doesn't mean that the whole system is set up properly to actually get that level of effectiveness out of it. And that's a whole nother inspection. In fact, your average HVAC guy on a service call can't talk to the efficiency of an HVAC system. To do that test, you have to do what's called a heat load test, which most really good HVAC guys don't do. You have to have special companies come in and do that. So there are things that are beyond the scope of even what the experts do that most people don't realize. We have the right to exclude certain components, and then we don't do insurability or warrantability. Now, why would we exclude a component? Now, you got to remember, some of this language is ancient for our License Act. It's 25 years old. They really envisioned that some of us would be only mechanical or only structural inspectors, and that has not been the way it has worked out in the industry. We all do both. But what this does allow me to do is to say, I'm not qualified to do the swimming pool. Now, that's also an optional system, so we're not required to do it, but it backs that up in allowing us to say I'm not going to do the pool. Now, personally, I do pool sprinklers in summer kitchens all the time, which are optional pieces of equipment to a house. But we are allowed to exclude something for which we're not competent or qualified, but also inaccessible, can't be inspected properly. We just have to list it. So if there's no gas, I have to put in 3 different places that I